The United States just got a brutal reality check. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent returned from Stockholm red-faced and empty-handed, having failed to convince China to strike a trade deal. What was supposed to be a display of American strength ended up exposing the cracks in Washington's entire strategy. China didn't cave. They didn't flinch. In fact, they're pushing back harder than ever, and they know exactly where the U.S. is vulnerable. And while Washington panics, Beijing remains calm, confident, and unyielding. The illusion that America can still strong-arm China is unraveling, and the world is watching. This story goes far deeper than a failed negotiation. It reveals a much larger shift in global power. So let's break it all down: how China outplayed the U.S. in Stockholm, how a major Panama Canal deal just collapsed under Chinese pressure, and why Trump's once vaunted deal-making playbook may now be useless. The collapse in Stockholm. The recent U.S.-China trade talks in Stockholm were meant to be a turning point. After months of rising tariffs, political threats, and diplomatic chest-thumping, the Trump administration entered the room expecting Beijing to fold. Instead, they hit a wall. Trump's team, led by Bessent, came armed with the same tactics that had worked against weaker trade partners in the past: threats, deadlines, and pressure. But Beijing wasn't Canada, or Mexico, or even the European Union. Those nations had all caved to Trump's pressure tactics in previous years. The EU in particular folded fast, agreeing to U.S.-favored terms that sacrificed parts of its agriculture and industry. Even French President Macron reportedly called it submission. But China didn't submit. Beijing stood its ground. With quiet defiance, they refused to make concessions, refused to rush, and refused to be bullied. What the Trump team expected to be a swift victory has now turned into a diplomatic quagmire. Bessent left Stockholm without a deal. What he did leave with was a handshake understanding to extend the current tariff pause, set to expire August 12. No binding agreement, no paper, no enforcement. Just uncertainty. The U.S. continues to impose 30% tariffs on Chinese goods. China maintains 10% retaliatory duties. And both sides are publicly optimistic, but behind the scenes, talks are stalling. And that's because China holds the stronger hand. China's leverage. Here's the uncomfortable truth for Washington. China knows America can't afford a clean break. From rare earth minerals used in defense systems and smartphones, to manufacturing networks that sustain U.S. tech giants, to agricultural trade that supports Midwest farmers. America depends on China more than it likes to admit. Beijing is turning that dependency into leverage. When Trump first escalated tariffs back in April, Washington assumed Beijing would buckle. Instead, China retaliated, strategically targeting U.S. farmers, tech manufacturers, and defense supply chains. More importantly, Beijing didn't stop at retaliation. They started building economic independence. They restricted exports of rare earth minerals. They ramped up domestic supply chains. They blocked U.S. companies like Apple and Tesla from Chinese markets, while bolstering Chinese alternatives. Suddenly, U.S. defense contractors were warning of critical material shortages. Tech firms were seeing rising production costs and stalled shipments. And American farmers watched one of their biggest export markets disappear almost overnight. Trump's team thought they were applying pressure. In reality, they triggered a backlash that hurt American workers, not Chinese officials. And behind it all was President Xi Jinping, unshaken. While Trump relied on bravado, Xi played the long game, disciplined, silent, and immovable. Now, Stockholm talks are stalling, and Washington is out of moves. The strategy unravels. Trump's deal-making style built on coercion, threats, and dominance once delivered flashy victories, but only when America held the upper hand. With China, that advantage is gone. Beijing has alternatives: leverage, discipline, and the patience to wait out short-term chaos in pursuit of long-term power. Inside the White House, there's growing division. Some of Trump's advisors want to escalate, raise tariffs, issue ultimatums. Others fear that another hard push could trigger total collapse of the talks and unleash economic fallout that would hit American businesses first. Meanwhile, Beijing isn't panicking. They know this deal matters more to Washington than to them, and they're acting like it thought. This is more than a failed negotiation. It's the breakdown of a strategy. For years, Trump's supporters boasted about the art of the deal. But that art was always about having leverage. When the other side has real power, Trump's playbook falls apart. And while the Stockholm drama was unfolding, Washington suffered another humiliating loss this time, not at the negotiating table, but at the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal collapse. The second blow came just hours after Bessent's failed Stockholm talks. The collapse of the BlackRock port deal, a massive U.S.-led effort to wrest influence over the Panama Canal away from China. Trump had hailed the deal as a geopolitical triumph. BlackRock and shipping giant MSC were set to buy 43 ports across 23 countries, including 2 vital terminals near the Panama Canal, Balboa and Cristóbal, from CK Hutchison. Total value $22.8 billion. The strategic aim? To block China's growing maritime power and reclaim American control over key global choke points. But the deal failed. Why? Because China pushed back hard. Beijing insisted that its state-owned shipping titan, COSCO, be part of the port acquisition consortium. Chinese regulators raised red flags. State media called the deal a betrayal of national interests and warned Hutchison not to sell to American firms. Faced with regulatory pressure and nationalist outrage, Hutchison let the exclusive deadline expire. No deal was signed. Now, reports suggest Hutchison is back in talks with a Chinese investor. Exactly what Washington feared. In the span of a week, Trump's administration lost its grip on both the China trade talks and the Panama Canal. The U.S. didn't just lose ground. It lost face. Panama in chaos. Beijing advances. To make matters worse, internal politics in Panama are heating up. The country's Comptroller General has filed a lawsuit to annul Hutchison's port concessions, entirely alleging massive financial irregularities and billions in lost public revenue. While the case unfolds, it casts a dark shadow over foreign investment in Panama. American firms that once saw an opportunity now see instability. And China? It's watching carefully and moving quickly. If BlackRock exits the deal, COSCO or another Chinese state-backed entity could swoop in and secure long-term control over the canal's access points, solidifying Beijing's strategic influence over global shipping lanes. The implications are huge. The Panama Canal is the heartbeat of global trade between the Atlantic and Pacific. Losing that to China is more than symbolic. Its strategic collapse the world is watching. In just 1 week, the U.S. suffered 2 critical setbacks. A failed trade negotiation with China, where Beijing refused to budge. The collapse of a $22.8 billion canal port deal, once championed as a counter to China's global expansion. In both cases, America blinked and China didn't. The message to the world is loud and clear. The U.S. can no longer assume that power equals control, that tariffs equal victory, or that deals can be forced through threats. Trump's old formula, coercion over cooperation, may have worked once, but the rules have changed. China isn't playing defense anymore. It's rewriting the script. And the U.S. is left without a winning move. So now we're left with one big question. How long can America pretend to lead, while China quietly tightens its grip behind the scenes? If you want to stay ahead of the global power shift, don't. Forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. We'll be watching what happens next.